I'm just so honored and thrilled to be here, and it's quite a full house out for the Constitution. And I think Daryl actually, first of all, let me thank Daryl for inviting me. Thank you. But if it's okay with folks, I'm very used to being in a classroom and asking questions, so there'll be a little bit of class participation tonight. I hope that's okay with folks. My first question, actually, he teed up really well. Any idea why across 4 books the same word pops up in every single title? Why? How to read the Constitution and why. I tell my students the why is more important than the what. Any idea why? Any idea? Why is the why? Imagine, is anyone here a car mechanic? Or know how to, fix a toilet, or know how to knit a sweater? I'm a knitter. You can explain what a sweater is, but you can't knit it unless you know why the yarn is going the way it's going, right? You cannot, your car breaks down by the side of the road. I'm calling AAA, I'm be honest with you, because I don't know why it broke down. Right, so I tell my law students, if you understand the why, you can noodle through the what on your own. If you understand why we have speed limits, right? There is the what of the speed limit, 35 miles an hour. Anybody? Why do we have speed limits? Safety, right, exactly. So if you know that it's about safety, you can kind of then back your way into what the law actually says. So spoiler alert, that's kind of how I'm motivated in my teaching, is to give people the tools to solve these problems on their own. Don't listen to me. And have your own agency to solve these problems or think through them differently. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself, because I've spoken to a lot of groups, and I think I stand up sometimes, like all of us, and people have ideas or wonder what I'm about. I'm from Buffalo, New York. And I have a daughter, 2 daughters in Philadelphia, so even the Bills didn't make it to the Super Bowl. It was still a good day in my house. I'm a mother of 4 daughters. So people are, whoa, 4 daughters. But statistics show we'll live longer if you've got daughters, actually. And dogs. I have 2 little 12-pound dogs, so I'm great in terms of longevity, like many of us here. Like I said, I'm one of 6 children. My grandparents on my mother's side were really foundational in establishing my value system and how I live in the world. My grandmother's parents actually emigrated from Ukraine at the turn of the last century. She grew up in, very low income in a farm on a hill in Pennsylvania. Both my grandparents had 7th grade educations, but I'll tell you about my grandfather. When it would snow in Buffalo, he would get up with his snowblower and do everybody's driveway on the street at 76 years old and go home and not even let anybody know who the tooth fairy of snow was when they wake up in the morning. And so I teach my children that the light and the darkness, as dark as life can be, is your value system, is your integrity. That's what you have, right? And stick to some rules, and they understand this. So I was a practicing lawyer. I worked for Ken Starr in the Whitewater investigation, investigating Bill Clinton. I was in the Department of Justice. I was in private practice. Then I had my first child and went into teaching. And did that for a long time. And then in 2017, I was reading the New York Times, and there was a statement in the New York Times that said, the president's pardon power is absolute. So this is my very first op-ed in the Baltimore Sun, where I was, actually nothing in the Constitution's absolute. You balance things. If people were pardoned just based on their race, there'd probably be a challenge under the 14th Amendment, right? I mean, it's a balancing act. And then full circle, my last book that came out in September was Pardon Power. So those are the bookends of my career. And I really became interested in civic education, which I've had, kids I have one left in high school. She's learning American history now. And it's a lot of what's. Not a lot of Y's in American history for kids. And the Annenberg Center in University of Pennsylvania does they do a study every year of about 3,000 people. And in 2015, when I started this, only a third of Americans could name all 3 branches of government. And if that's you, it's legislative, judicial, and executive. And actually, that's improved. Today, the number is 65%. But 15% cannot name a single branch of government. And asked which rights are guaranteed by the First Amendment, good news, 74% of Americans can name freedom of speech. But the next popular one, anyone want to guess? What's the next?
Right to bear arms.
In the First Amendment. Did somebody say religion? Yeah, that's the second one that people know, but only 39% could name that one. Only 39% knew that freedom of religion is guaranteed in the Constitution. Only about half of adults know which party controls each house of the United States Congress. And this is getting a little old, but it's my favorite. In 2016, recent college graduates that were polled, 10% of them thought Judge Judy was on the United States Supreme Court. So, you know, folks, you can't fix a car if you don't know how it works. You just can't, right? You're calling AAA, I'm there, an hour goes by, you're hoping, right? Or my kids are calling, Mom, I got an offender bender, tears running down their face. I can't help them. Likewise, we can't really fix the Constitution or our government or anything if we don't know how it works. So that's why I got into this. There is some consensus, however. Over 80%, back to our friends on the Supreme Court, 80% of Americans want Supreme Court justices not to make decisions in cases in which they have a financial interest or a personal interest. Yeah, 80% want an ethics code, right, that for the United States Supreme Court. So along then came my second book. After, the first one was How to Read the Constitution and Why. Basically, I was, we need to explain this in a why way, not in a lecturing way. So I wrote the first book. Then I realized, wow, believe it or not, it took me how many years I'm teaching law students. It took me writing a whole book on the Constitution to realize voting is everything. And I'll explain why. So I wrote the second book. Only about 50% of us vote. In elections. It goes up in presidential years. The highest was actually the last election in 2020, 66%. This last fall, it was 63.9%. So, I mean, people are cynical about it, but also, think it doesn't matter. But we're in the great state of Florida. Does anybody remember how many votes the presidential election was decided by in the year 2000 by the voters in this state? 537 votes. The entire presidential election was decided, probably not that many more than people in this room. I think there's about 400 of us. That's kind of amazing, right? And when I tell young people that, it's shocking to them because they think, why should I bother, right? But it really is a gift and a privilege. I live in Washington, D.C., right outside Washington, D.C., and there's a lot of people from all over the world. You get in an Uber or whatever, and there are people that don't have the ability to vote, and they're in awe that we have this because they know what it's like to not have that. Right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about more of that. So here's another one, a trick of my teaching. Is I'll even ask third-year law students some really basic things, and they can't give me a definition. What is a cause of action, which is a legal right to relief? They can't tell me. So I'm going to do that here too. And it's not a gotcha thing. It's just because I don't think we really think about these things. So my first question, and we're hearing this nonstop ad nauseum. What's the rule of law? Anybody want to try? Hand. What is the rule of law? Any working definition, an idea? What do I mean by the rule of law? No one's above the law. So what is a law? What is a law? I've actually written a whole law review article on this, so this is not an easy question. What is a law? A rule that you what? A rule with penalties. A rule with penalties. Who makes the rule? Legislatures make the rule. Okay, so in common law England, anyone seen Hamilton? Yeah. Or anybody remember the School of Rock from the 1970s? I'm just a bill. Remember all that? I love that. All Schoolhouse Rock, okay? So it was no more kings, whatever. So in England, the rule of law, the law came from God. That was the theory. It was called the divine rights of kings. And the notion was, if you've watched Game of Thrones or something, you slay the king on the battlefield, and the idea was God picked you. God wanted you to be king. And so if you think about a monarchy, think of a pyramid or a triangle. King at the top, power comes from the divine, and then the king hands out goodies to whoever he wants. It's very subjective. And so people hoped for benevolent kings because there were no limits on kings. There were no consequences for violating the rules because the king was the law, because the king spoke for God. Okay, that's the idea. And then believe it or not, by the time the framers, we had a revolution, there was a parliament in England. It wasn't an unlimited monarchy, and a parliament is like our legislature. Okay, so the framers of the Constitution flipped that upside down. So we're now an inverted pyramid or an inverted triangle, and you could put presidents, say it's the closest thing to a king, at the bottom of the triangle. Any idea what's at the top of the triangle? What's the flat thing now? What? We the people, exactly. We the people are at the top. We are the bosses. We give the pink slips at the ballot box, right? And our power trickles down to whoever's in power. It's our power, actually. It's kind of amazing. It was like revolutionary, this idea, because there was thousands and thousands of years of these hierarchies where there was just a boss of everybody, and you just had to hope they liked you. And they could change their mind tomorrow and send you to the dungeon, right? That's how it went. And the framers were like, no, the people get the power. It's messy, where it's hard to make consensus, it's burdensome, it's a mess and difficult, and we're all frustrated. There are probably people in this room, I won't ask for hands, that are sick of the Constitution, don't think it's working. There are others that are, wow, like me, I'm a passionate defender of it, or for now, right? Some are like, don't really think about it. Next basic question, justice. What's justice? Sorry? Getting what you deserve. Getting what you deserve. Great question, and we'll get back to that when I talk about rights. Any other definition? Here's our friend Aristotle. Any idea what Aristotle said, which actually was very unhelpful? He said justice is the opposite of injustice. That's what lawyers call circular reasoning. It's not very helpful. But we all probably know a few kids. Kids kind of know a lot about justice, right? They kind of know it intrinsically. Anybody a teacher here? What would a kid say is about justice, do you think? Fairness, exactly, fairness. They kind of know. Again, I was raised with 5 kids, and we drank milk back then in the 70s with dinner, and everyone had to be exactly the same. There couldn't be any more milk in the glass, or it was like unfair, right? We kind of knew that. And really the Constitution, and this is one of the little cheat sheets, I'll tell you, like my trick on the Supreme Court. All the Constitution is balancing. At the end of the day, it's just, you're balancing things. Take guns. You're balancing access, right to guns with public safety. The same thing with speed limits, right? I mean, you could take, access to a police officer being able to execute a warrant on someone's home. Balance your privacy rights with the necessity of making sure that crimes get adjudicated and people that are dangerous in public. You're always balancing, right? Where I live, it's 65 miles an hour between DC and Baltimore. Other places it's 70, some places it's 55. That's all a balancing. The people in that state's kind of, through their elected leaders, their sense of where do we want to infringe on our ability to drive. Believe it or not, when Ronald Reagan came into office, some of you might remember this, there was a big debate about seatbelts. right? Kind of like what happened with masks and things. People really felt strongly, listen, if I want to fly through the front windshield, it's up to me. It's my life, it's my car, right? And then we kind of collectively decided public safety outweighs my freedom to not be strapped into a vehicle, right? I mean, you could say it's, so it's a balancing. So that's justice. And I think it's really important to keep these ideas in mind because they're not black and white, right? There's not one answer to these things. You can ask one person what's fair and it'll be slightly different from the next person, the next child. Here's my last point that I think is really animating all of law. What motivates people to do the right thing? Fear of punishment is a big one. What else? Conscience, and then there's one more.
Because they care about other people?
Yeah, conscience, exactly. And the one more is goodies, right? Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I did with my kids, right? So you can have 15 more minutes of Blue's Clues if you finish your carrots, right? That kind of thing. So some people talk about that, the carrot or the stick. You can motivate someone with a goodie, or you can punish them. Or you also, people mentioned, you just have your internal compass. Like I said, my grandma and grandpa Nelson taught me this idea that this is just how you live in the world. My grandfather called me Kimmiku, right? This is just what you do, Kim. And it's really stuck with me. It's not a law somewhere. Some people call it natural law, philosophers and law professors. Okay, so what does all of this have to do with the United States Constitution? The Constitution is really about all the things we're talking about. Human nature. The framers, our friend James Madison, who was one of the three people who wrote what's called the Federalist Papers, which was really, it was kind of newspaper articles trying to persuade people to support ratification of the Constitution. So there's these papers that they wrote and regular people would read them, and Madison explained why they flipped the triangle and made it upside down. And he said, if men were angels, we would not need government. If men were angels, we would not need government. Right? If we all had jobs. My kids have worked at, my daughter was waiting tables over the summer. I think she's an ethical person. But if you're running a restaurant and you don't have checks and balances, you don't make sure you're counting the cups or you're counting the money in the drawer. People, you can hire the best person possible, but you gotta make sure that there are consequences you're checking because as Madison understood, it's human nature with no consequences to eventually abuse take a 20 on your way out the door, grab a bottle of wine, whatever it is, right? So if you want to keep your restaurant open, you have to have checks and balances and consequences. You have to, or it will close. And that's basically what the framers believed about a democracy. Without checks and balances, it'll close. We'll flip the triangle back to a pyramid, right, where it'll be unlimited power in one person. And so here's the Federalist Papers. So the framers really, the Constitution is more about psychology than anything. It's about this understanding that, we're all good people, but we make mistakes and we're conflicted. It's like the angel and the devil. And sometimes we don't make the right call and we're motivated by things that aren't consistent with what's best for our neighbor or even our families. We've all been in there. That's humanity. But I like to call this the separation of powers axis 1 of the Constitution. It's the three-headed government, not the single, right? The three-headed monster, so to speak, where there's not power in one place, we break it into three. And every branch gets their papers graded by the other two branches. That's axis 1. Okay, so now we'll come back to this in a second, but I want to get back to a comment that was made over here about a right, something that someone deserves. People think of a constitutional right. Anyone have other definition of a constitutional right? What does it mean to have a right? Where does it come from? Some will come in the Constitution. The original Constitution did not have any rights. That's in the Bill of Rights, right? Other places, though? Conscience could be, yeah, your right could come from your conscience. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, sir. Religion, absolutely. Rights could be like some kind of divine rights, right? Based on if you act a certain way, you'll enter into some higher state of being at some point, right? Or you'll get some things while you're alive that are coming to you because of how you behave in the world. All kinds of things, right? But when you think about a constitutional right, we talked about right to free speech, we talked about right to bear arms, we talked about right to freedom of religion. Okay, these are listed in the Constitution. So does anyone disagree with me that you have a right to go in your home? Right? I mean, if you're paying your mortgage, you're paying your rent, that's your right. It's actually not in the Constitution, believe it or not. There's a lot of rights that are not in the Constitution. There's no right in the Constitution not to get married to whoever you want, setting aside gay or, biracial marriage, just marrying anybody. There's no right in the Constitution to be able to raise your kids the way you want and not have government come in and tell you. There's no right in the Constitution to choose your own health care. Other parts of the world, the government gets to decide those things for you. This stuff is not in the Constitution, but we do have this sense that some people call it natural rights, right? That it's just ours, right? And government should butt out. So imagine that you come home one day, right? Because we said you've got a right to go home. You've got a right to go but there's police officers surrounding your house. What happens to your right? What do you do?
Call a lawyer.
You call a lawyer, exactly. Yay! You call a lawyer, and what's the lawyer gonna do? Gonna file a suit. And what is it? It's gonna go before which branch of government? The judicial. And what do you want to get? You want a piece of paper. What is a piece of paper called? An order, right? And you march down to your house and you hand them the order and you say, go away. Because the judge who has the power of government is saying you're violating my constitutional right, my Fourth Amendment right, really. There's privacy in a way. Privacy is not in the Constitution, but even Justice Scalia recognized a privacy right to your home. This was the first case. Heller versus DC versus Heller, which the first case that recognized an individual right to bear arms, was all about privacy in your home, not in the Constitution. But this is where I get to my next point, Axis 2, this idea of rights. Rights are actually, they're in the Bill of Rights, right? We've listed some rights, but your rights are only so good as you can enforce them, and you can get the government to comply. You don't have a tooth fairy of rights that is going to go down and do it for you. You've got to do it. So it's leveraging and pulling the levers of the other branches of government to tell the executive branch, which is a police officer, no, sorry, right? This is if you've got the police officer at your door and you've got any branch that's abusing their power, you got to see who's going to give the tickets for speeding. And I literally give this to my constitutional law students. So we've got legislative, executive, judicial. You go down on the bottom and the checks. So if the Congress is screwing up, what can the president do? Veto legislation, pardon people, exercise prosecutorial discretion to not bring a case or bring a case. Judges can oversee what Congress does and strike it down. Presidents go down there, legislative, impeach, veto, override a veto, control the budget, do some oversight by Congress, create laws, they call them statutes that constrain the president, and the judges can actually review what presidents do. This is a three-headed branch. And you can go through with the judicial branch too. That's the idea, no power concentrated in one spot. So if you connect Axis 1 and Axis 2, here are our police officers not letting us in the house. For your rights to have meaning, you gotta have that separation of powers. You gotta be able to issue tickets for speeding to the branch that's violating your rights. So the rights are dependent on having a government that's accountable to the people. Because if the police doesn't care what the judge says, you're not going in your house. How are you going to make them go away? You can only make them go away if they respect what the judge said they have to do, right? Which is kind of our social contract in this country, that we abide by the rules and then everybody's better off. Here's Justice Douglas. He said, the liberties of none are safe unless the liberties of all are protected. Rights for me but not for thee is going to break the system, right? Because eventually they'll come for your rights too, because nobody cares. There's no tickets for speeding. I can do whatever I want, right? I bet you I have kids. No eating pizza in the living room, except when it's a Super Bowl, right? How many kids are going to follow that rule one more time, right? A 5-year-old understands. If you let them get away with it once, it's not a rule anymore, right? They understand that, and so did the framers, and that's why we have our system that we have. And I like to think of it, we're very polarized. That's one of those terms that are used all the time. We just had a big football game, the Super Bowl yesterday. We have teams, and we're in red teams and blue teams and red teams and blue teams. And I'm on my team, and it's my team. So I don't care about everything else because it's my team. Well, imagine the bridge is our Constitution, and we've got red cops and blue cops in uniforms on the bridge. And they're fighting for who's in charge of the bridge. And sometimes it's the red teams, and sometimes it's the blue cops, and then the people in the red cars are mad at the people in the blue cars, and where everybody's fighting and hating each other and all this stuff, right? Meanwhile, no one's paying any attention to the bridge. The bridge is 250 years old. The grouting is wearing out. Let me ask you this, when the bridge falls, who survives? No one. It doesn't matter what color your shirt is. It doesn't matter what team you're on. The bridge holds everybody up. That's what that's why I got into this business, is to try to explain this in common sense terms, that we all understand this. We all know this. You all live your lives this way. We all live our lives this way. And somehow we've lost sight of the bridge. And this is also my friend, William Douglas. I'll read what he says. As nightfall does not come all at once, neither does oppression. In both instances, there's a twilight when everything remains seemingly unchanged. And it is in such twilight that we all must be most aware of change in the air, however slight, lest we become unwitting victims of the darkness. He wrote this to a group of law students in a letter. Very, very compelling and insightful. And I think we have to understand there's some truth to that. There's some truth to that in our own lives, right? People talk about boiling frogs, or if you throw it in the cold water and turn it up, it won't jump out. The frog, if you throw it in the hot water, it'll jump out. All right. So what do we do about this? That's a big question I get a lot. And here are a few answers, again, bearing on common sense, going back to Grandma and Grandpa Nelson, who are, since passed, as have my parents, but really I live with it every single day, these lessons I learned as a small child, right? Number one, black and white thinking isn't that helpful. Now, if you're going 65 miles an hour, it's a speed limit, you're going 75, that's black and white. You're in the box or you're out of the box. But most of your life, hard decisions, is more like drive carefully, right? You're not in or out of the box. I mean, drive carefully for someone who's sight impaired is different from, a NASCAR driver whose wife is having a baby in the back seat, right? I mean, you let them go, right? That's a little bit differently. And most of our constitutional questions are not black and white. They're drive carefully kind of questions that depend on the weather. They depend on the traffic. They depend on all kinds of things. And we have to exercise our judgment and sometimes a value system. The other thing, anyone know who this guy is? Pete Seeger, yes. I'm always teaching 20-year-olds and they don't know anything like that. So Pete Seeger said, quote, "It's a very important thing to learn to talk to people you disagree with." A very important thing. And as some of you might know, I'm also really passionate about our youth. Rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, particularly for girls, you've probably heard, is up. Pundits and experts attribute it to COVID, but actually there's been research that shows that they're feeling deprived of what's called relatedness. That they want to connect with other people through shared understandings, valuing each other, negotiating and compromising, and they don't know how to do it, and we're not modeling it for them. And they're feeling really isolated and terrified. They don't know how to connect. I just taught a class a few years ago, right when COVID started, at American University. It was called Democracy at Risk. It wasn't, somebody else named the class, I was just asked to teach it. And I was like, whoa, how do I make this a comfortable environment? So I asked the students, there were 30 of them, before we hit hot, really difficult topics, to read 2 opinion editorials on different points of view on the same subject matter. Gun rights, limit guns, whatever. Make it something really difficult. I mean, that's a very polarized question. Abortion, whatever it is. And then we talked about where do you find good information, right? Don't just get on TikTok. But like, how do you get in your, if anyone's seen Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, right? I'm like, get in your DeLorean and go to the 1970s, where the media all kind of sang off to the same page, and legacy media, there are some that really do check their homework and they want to do the right thing. And they said at the end of the semester a couple things. It was shocking to me. These are law students. They said, this is the first time, Professor Wehle, we have ever felt safe to have opinions that others might disagree with in a classroom. The second thing they said is, in having to read 2 different points of view, we came in curious, not defensive, right? It's a different mindset. This is my team, this is my position, and I'm gonna rattle off all the reasons why I'm right. Versus like, golly, I didn't really think of it that way. Let me ask about that some more. Let me hold back on my opinion. And we had this, it was a Zoom at that point, and literally some of the students were choked up and almost in tears because they felt so good about being able to talk through hard things in an environment that was safe for them, where they didn't feel like they'll be attacked and shunned and marginalized and shamed and labeled, right? So this led to my next book, How to Think Like a Lawyer and Why. And now people are like, oh my gosh, thinking like a lawyer, are you kidding? It's like, pigs like wrestling in mud and lawyers love to fight, like, right? That's the thing. How could a lawyer help? So I break down legal analysis into a 5-step process, which you can use in having hard conversations. Most hard problems: do I take the job in California? Do I get the surgery? Do I get a divorce? I went through a bad divorce. It's not an easy question. It's not black and white. And there's a lot of sub-questions. What does it do to me financially? What does it mean for the kids? What's the school system like there? All the things. So you break a big problem down into smaller ones. Number 2, Grandma and Grandpa, identify your values. What really matters to you? For me personally, it was just moving through it as quickly as possible to minimize the stress on my family. Which means, you got to give stuff up. C, collect a lot of information from good sources. In Buffalo, my mom, a 5, would get the next encyclopedia at the Super Duper if she spent enough groceries. That was all of our research. That was it, was the Super Duper encyclopedia. We had to learn how to find information. Now the kids have to learn how to sort it. It's overwhelming, and they don't have that skill. They don't know what's good and what's bad, and we don't really either, because it's come so fast, right? So collect good information. Analyze both sides. Pete Seeger, right? Black and white thinking, meh. And then realize you're not gonna get everything. You won't get 100 cents on the dollar, right? You're not gonna always, lawyers have to tell their clients this, listen, you should win, but you might not. The jury might do something you disagree with. The judge might not. I can't guarantee it, right? Another statistic for you, 2002 Pew Research survey showed 65 to 72% of people from both parties, Republicans and Democrats, when asked, agreed with the statement that someone from the other political party is more immoral than regular people. Really? 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 I mean, that's what we're giving our kids, friends, right? You can't judge a book by a cover. You can't, we'll learn things from each other when we connect. We find common ground. So 4 traits of lawyers, back to lawyers, that I want to just share with you. Again, we get a really bad rap for a good reason. There's some bad guys and gals out there for sure. But good lawyers are trained to identify and exhaust all arguments. That's my BICAT, right? The A in BICAT. They have to know their opponent's best case, or you'll get caught with your pants down. Sorry for the metaphor, right? You'll get caught. The judge will notice it. It'll be embarrassing. You'll lose if you cannot stand up and give the best argument for your opponent. Imagine a world in which, instead of digging into our team and our side, our first instinct when we met someone who disagreed with us was to assume they're a good person, that they have integrity and judgment, and imagine their best argument for their position, and come to the conversation with that energy. Imagine. Number 2, lawyers have to take into account a value system. We talked about it, public safety, why we have speed limits. They have to do that. It's baked into the law. That's the why behind the what, right? Imagine a world in which, when we had differences, we identified our values first. What do we care? What are we choosing how do we choose our best friends? Who do we go to when we have a hard problem to resolve? If I'm sad and I'm crying, who's the person I pick up the phone? What do I teach my children? What is taught in my religious place of worship? Well, which doctors do I trust? And that's how we make our decisions at the ballot box. That's how we engage with politics. We will find much more in common than separates us. Third, lawyers have a right to demand respect from opponents in court, in writing, and when sitting across a negotiation table. But they don't do that because they're bullying, or they're mean, or they're accusing. They do it because they have established a level of respect for each other, right? Those kind of tactics don't fly in front of judges. Your reputation is everything. I tell my first year's law students, you can be a tough lawyer, but you've got to be a fair person, right? Or nobody's going to hire you. I mean, there might be some, Roy Cohn and some others in the 1950s. But we don't, that's I guess, a choice. If that's the kind of, I tell my students, if you want a lawyer that way, that's fine. I don't live my life that way, personally. Imagine a world in which people gained agency and power in our lives by earning other people's respect in a careful, reasoned, thoughtful, humane way, rather than tearing each other down. Totally different world. Lastly, lawyers have to disagree on Monday and work together on Tuesday, right? They might see you at the lunch counter in the courtroom, or see that your kids might be on the same baseball team. You can be vigorous opponent, advocate in court, but the next day you got to get along. Imagine a world in which we approached all our relationships with the aim of keeping them strong. Right? So we can't always be right. Sometimes we just got to say, okay, well, whatever. We can agree to disagree, or whatever it is. I love you anyway. Okay? So I want to leave you with 2 things. One is just a little homework. And the homework is to try to change your mind about something. It can be something big that, what's happening in the world. It can be whether you like pickles. I don't know. It doesn't, right? Or bowling, or I don't know. It can be trying something, watching a reality TV show, or for me, frankly, football. My daughter's boyfriend tells me every single play of everything, and I can't keep track of it. But try to change your mind about something, right? Little kids do it all the time. Think of a 15-month-old. they get up and they fall, and they get up and they fall, and they get up and they fall and they fall, and eventually they can walk. And it's a beautiful thing. So we can fall a few times, right? Learn something new, realize you don't have it all. And then my last thing, I want to end with a quote from another one of my, spiritual advisors, for lack of a better word, or just like how to live in the world, a guy by the name of Fred Rogers. I watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It was we had 3 channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS and PBS. That was it. And he said many things. Quote, in times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts, and to be assured that our questions are just as important as our answers, right? And so with that, I'll take questions, but thank you so much.